in the French Alps. He weighs 520 pounds. Andre, the Giant.
An awesome figure.
From Kamala's gun-toting confrontation over a racial slur to Big John Studd's brutal punishment for calling Andre a freak and the rare moment when Andre actually backed down from Haku, these conflicts reveal the Giant's darkest side. But which wrestler suffered the most humiliating incident that still shocks wrestling fans today? Kamala. Our journey begins with one of the most explosive and potentially deadly conflicts in Andre's entire career, the confrontation with James Harris, better known to wrestling fans worldwide as Kamala. This wasn't some minor backstage disagreement that was smoothed over with a handshake and a beer. This was a situation that escalated to the point where a loaded firearm entered the equation, transforming what started as a professional miscommunication into something that could have ended in genuine tragedy. The incident stands as one of the most dangerous backstage confrontations in wrestling history, a stark reminder that the line between performance and reality could blur in terrifying ways. The incident occurred in the early 1980s during a WWF event, a time when Andre was already dealing with the increasingly debilitating effects of acromegaly, the hormonal disorder that caused his gigantism and brought with it chronic, excruciating pain in his joints and bones. During their match, Kamala, who was working under his Ugandan Giant gimmick, botched a move in the ring. Now, mistakes happen in professional wrestling. It's a physical, demanding art form where timing and coordination are everything, and even the best performers occasionally miss their marks. But for Andre, who was already operating at a physical deficit due to his condition and relying on his opponents to work carefully and precisely with his limited mobility, this botch was more than just an inconvenience. It was a painful reminder of his own declining abilities and a frustration that he couldn't contain. Backstage, away from the roaring crowds and the bright lights, Andre's frustration boiled over into something far uglier. In a moment of anger and pain-fueled irritability, Andre lashed out verbally at Kamala, calling him a dumb son of a bee, a phrase that carried unmistakable racial undertones in an era when such language was particularly loaded and inflammatory. For Kamala, a black wrestler working in an industry that had its own complicated history with race relations, this wasn't just an insult to be brushed off. It was a deeply personal affront that struck at his dignity and demanded an immediate response. The words cut deeper than any physical blow could have, touching on decades of systemic racism and personal experiences of discrimination that Kamala had endured throughout his life and career. The confrontation escalated rapidly into a physical altercation right there in the backstage area. Kamala, enraged by the slur, landed multiple punches on Andre, and despite Andre's legendary size and strength, his acromegaly-ravaged body couldn't respond effectively. The Giant, who had dominated opponents in the ring for decades, found himself unable to mount a proper defense, his physical limitations exposed in this very real, very dangerous situation. Other wrestlers and backstage personnel who witnessed this confrontation were stunned to see Andre, the man who had been an immovable force in wrestling for years, being physically overwhelmed by an opponent whose righteous anger gave him an edge that size alone couldn't counter. But the story didn't end there. In fact, it was about to take an even more serious turn that would forever mark this as one of the most dangerous backstage incidents in wrestling history. The next night, Kamala, still seething with anger over the racist language and feeling that the physical confrontation hadn't adequately addressed the insult to his dignity, arrived at Andre's dressing room carrying a gun. This wasn't posturing for the boys in the back or part of a wrestling angle being workshopped. This was a man demanding the respect and apology he felt he deserved, and he was prepared to ensure he got it by whatever means necessary. The tension in that moment must have been extraordinary, with everyone present realizing that this situation had spiraled far beyond typical backstage politics into territory where someone could genuinely be killed. The gravity of the situation finally penetrated Andre's alcohol and pain-clouded judgment, and recognizing that this had spiraled far beyond a typical backstage squabble into life-or-death territory, Andre did something that those who knew his proud, stubborn nature found remarkable. He apologized. This wasn't a casual, "sorry, brother," thrown out to smooth things over. This was a genuine acknowledgement of wrongdoing from a man who rarely admitted fault, recognizing that his words had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed without genuine contrition. That apology, combined with Kamala's eventual respect for Andre's willingness to own his mistake and demonstrate genuine remorse, led to a reconciliation that allowed the two giants to work together professionally. In 1984, they engaged in a successful WWF feud that drew substantial crowds across the country with their contrasting personas. Andre's eighth wonder of the world against Kamala's savage Ugandan giant, creating compelling television decision that capitalized on their legitimate size advantage over the rest of the roster. While Kamala's conflict with Andre ultimately found resolution through apology and professional collaboration, demonstrating that even the most serious racial incidents could potentially be overcome with genuine contrition and mutual respect, the next wrestler's story would prove that not all racially charged incidents ended so fortunately. Bad News Brown. If the conflict with Kamala was explosive and immediate, but ultimately resolved through apology and professional reconciliation, the animosity between Andre and Alan Cage, who wrestled as Bad News Brown, was something deeper, darker, and ultimately unresolved. A festering wound that never healed and left Brown harboring genuine hatred for the Giant until Andre's death in 1993. This wasn't a conflict that could be smoothed over with an apology or transformed into a profitable wrestling angle. This was personal animosity rooted in racist behavior and culminating in one of the most humiliating moments of Brown's entire career, creating a rift that time and circumstance would never bridge. The genesis of their conflict occurred during a 1980s tour of Japan with the WWF, a grueling schedule that had wrestlers spending countless hours together on buses, in hotels, and in locker rooms where personalities could clash and tensions could simmer in ways they might not during shorter domestic tours. The confined spaces and exhausting travel created pressure cooker situations where small irritations could explode into major conflicts. During this tour, a heavily intoxicated Andre made racial slurs toward Brown, a man who wasn't just any wrestler, but a legitimate Olympic bronze medalist in judo, someone whose toughness and athletic credentials were beyond question, and whose accomplishments outside of wrestling gave him a perspective that made him less tolerant of such disrespect than wrestlers who had known no other life. Brown, known throughout the industry for his no-nonsense attitude and unwillingness to tolerate disrespect from anyone regardless of their status or size, confronted Andre on the tour bus, ready to fight then and there if necessary. The tension in that confined space must have been palpable, with other wrestlers unsure whether they were about to witness a genuine brawl between two of the toughest men in the business. Andre's response to Brown's justified anger was dismissive and revealing of his own blind spots regarding race and privilege. He claimed he faced similar mockery for his Polish heritage, attempting to draw a false equivalence between ethnic jokes and racial slurs, as if the systemic racism that black wrestlers faced in the industry and in society at large was somehow comparable to comments about his European ancestry. This response demonstrated either a genuine lack of understanding about the different nature of these experiences or a willful refusal to acknowledge that difference, and either way, it only deepened Brown's resentment, leaving the tension unresolved and festering as they continued working in the same industry. But unlike Kamala's story, where Andre's apology led to reconciliation, there would be no such resolution here. Years later, in 1992, during a match in Mexico, an ill and intoxicated Andre, struggling with the advanced effects of acromegaly, lost control of his bodily functions and defecated on Brown mid-match. Now, some have tried to paint this as an unfortunate accident, a consequence of Andre's failing health and the loss of bodily control that sometimes accompanies advanced acromegaly. And certainly Andre was in terrible physical condition by 1992, his body ravaged by decades of his disorder and years of self-medication through alcohol, operating at a level of physical deterioration that would have forced most men out of the ring years earlier. But for Brown, who was already harboring deep resentment from the earlier racial incidents, this moment of humiliation in front of fans and fellow wrestlers was the ultimate degradation, the final insult in a relationship that had been poisoned from the start. Brown, maintaining his professionalism despite the horrific circumstances, finished the match, demonstrating the kind of toughness and dedication to the business that had defined his career. But the incident left him with a level of bitterness toward Andre that he carried for the rest of his life. In later interviews, Brown was vocal about his dislike for the Giant, describing him as arrogant and unapproachable, a sentiment that stood in stark contrast to the warm, generous portrayal of Andre that many other wrestlers offered in their reminiscences. Where most wrestlers spoke of Andre's kindness, his generosity in buying drinks for entire bars, his willingness to help younger talent, Brown's memories were of a man whose size and status had made him feel untouchable, someone who could insult and humiliate others without consequence. While Brown's conflict with Andre stemmed from racial insults and remained forever unresolved, demonstrating that some wounds cut too deep to ever heal, the next wrestler's tensions arose from a completely different source: professional disagreements about working style in the ring that reflected fundamental philosophical differences about what wrestling should be. The Iron Sheik. While racial tensions defined Andre's conflicts with Kamala and Bad News Brown, his relationship with Hossein Khosrow Ali Vaziri, better known as the Iron Sheik, was characterized by clashing styles, contrasting personalities, and a fundamental disagreement about what constituted professional wrestling. The Sheik was known throughout the industry for his stiff, hard-hitting style in the ring, delivering blows with real force that made matches feel more authentic and dangerous, but also increased the risk of injury to his opponents. This approach came from his legitimate amateur wrestling background and his belief that wrestling should look and feel real, even if the outcomes were predetermined, a philosophy that put him at odds with many performers who prioritized safety over realism. But for Andre, whose body was increasingly fragile due to acromegaly and who relied on opponents working carefully with his physical limitations, the Sheik's approach wasn't just unprofessional, it was potentially dangerous, threatening to cause real injuries that could shorten what remained of his already compromised career. Andre had reached a point where his joints were so deteriorated that even routine moves caused him significant pain, and the last thing he needed was an opponent who didn't understand or didn't care about the necessity of working carefully with someone in his condition. The tension came to a head during a 1984 WWF match, where Andre took serious issue with Sheik's unnecessarily forceful blows. For Andre, who prided himself on working safely and professionally despite his own limitations, the Sheik's stiff style represented everything wrong with wrestlers who prioritized looking tough over protecting their fellow performers. The philosophy of the business that Andre subscribed to was one of cooperation, where wrestlers worked together to create compelling entertainment while ensuring everyone went home healthy enough to work the next night. Frustrated and unwilling to let the disrespect continue, Andre essentially squashed the Sheik in the ring, delivering a punishing boot to the face and a leg drop, intentionally making the match one-sided in what the wrestling industry calls a receipt, a way of teaching an overly aggressive opponent a lesson they wouldn't soon forget. But the conflict between Andre and the Sheik extended beyond in-ring style differences into matters of character and professional conduct. Outside the ring, the Sheik was openly critical of Andre's demeanor and behavior, particularly toward fans. According to the Sheik's accounts in various interviews over the years, Andre could be rude to fans, shouting profanities and being difficult to approach, behavior that the Sheik found disrespectful to the people who made their careers possible by buying tickets and merchandise. This criticism touched on a sensitive point in Andre's psyche, his complicated relationship with his fame and the constant attention his size attracted, which he often found exhausting and invasive, leading to moments of irritability that the Sheik interpreted as unprofessional disrespect. Their interactions remained strained throughout their time working together, even as they participated in various WWF tag matches and angles. The Iron Sheik's veteran status didn't protect him from Andre's wrath when he worked too stiffly, but the next conflict would show that even rising young superstars with explosive momentum weren't immune to the Giant's harsh lessons in ring psychology and respect. Ultimate Warrior. If the Iron Sheik's stiff style irritated Andre, the conflict between Andre and James Hellwig, who performed as the Ultimate Warrior, demonstrated what happened when youthful recklessness and inexperience collided with Andre's rigid expectations for ring work and his increasingly fragile physical condition. The Warrior's entire presentation was built on intensity, power, and barely controlled chaos. He sprinted to the ring at full speed, shaking the ropes with manic energy, and delivered devastating clotheslines with real force that made his matches feel dangerous and unpredictable, working at a pace that suggested genuine destruction rather than choreographed performance. During late 1980s WWF house shows, the Warrior's signature hard-hitting clotheslines repeatedly irritated Andre, who had explicitly warned the young wrestler to lighten up his offense due to his weakened joints and vulnerable physical condition. These warnings weren't suggestions or mere preferences, they were necessary precautions to prevent real injury to a man whose body was already operating at the edge of its capabilities. Andre had reached a point where his neck, already supporting a head that was disproportionately large due to acromegaly, couldn't withstand the kind of impact that the Warrior's full-force clotheslines delivered with reckless abandon. But the Warrior, caught up in his character and his rapid ascent to wrestling stardom, riding high on crowd reactions and pushing his way up the card with remarkable speed, ignored Andre's advice. This wasn't necessarily malicious. The Warrior was young, relatively inexperienced, despite his push, and perhaps didn't fully understand or appreciate the severity gravity of Andre's physical condition, or the legitimate danger his stiff work posed to someone whose body was already compromised by decades of disease. Andre's response was swift, decisive, and sent shockwaves through the locker room that are still discussed in wrestling circles today. During one match, fed up with the Warrior's refusal to adjust his style despite repeated warnings, Andre simply punched the Warrior unconscious, then walked out of the ring without even bothering to pin him, leaving his opponent knocked out on the canvas in front of a confused audience and a stunned locker room. This wasn't a finished work or a planned spot. This was Andre delivering a real-world lesson in respect and ring psychology to a wrestler who needed to learn that the business required cooperation and consideration, not just raw athleticism and intensity. The message Andre sent that night resonated far beyond just the Warrior. Every wrestler in the locker room understood that disrespecting Andre's requests for safer work could result in legitimate consequences. The humiliation of being knocked out and abandoned in the ring by the Giant prompted the Warrior to make amends in a way that showed he understood the gravity of his mistake. He gifted Andre wine and adjusted his in-ring approach going forward. While the Warrior's offense was too stiff and physically dangerous for Andre's fragile condition, the next wrestler would learn that words could be just as harmful, especially when they struck at Andre's deepest insecurities about his appearance and his humanity. Big John Studd. While the Warriors' conflict stemmed from inexperience and recklessness that was ultimately correctable through harsh but effective teaching, the rivalry between Andre and John Minton, who wrestled as Big John Studd, represented one of the most personally charged feuds in Andre's career, precisely because it struck at the heart of his deepest insecurity, his acromegaly, and the physical appearance it created. This went beyond professional disagreements or in-ring style clashes into territory that was deeply, painfully personal for Andre, touching on issues of identity, dignity, and humanity that he had struggled with his entire life. In the mid-1980s WWF, Studd, himself a legitimately large man standing 6'10", tall and weighing over 300 pounds, was positioned as Andre's rival in a classic big man versus big man feud that would culminate at the first WrestleMania. But Studd, whether following a script or ad-libbing, made a critical mistake. He called Andre a freak. For Andre, who had dealt with mockery, stares, and cruel comments about his appearance throughout his entire life from childhood onward, the word freak wasn't just heel heat designed to sell tickets. It was a direct attack on his dignity and humanity. Acromegaly had given Andre his career and his fame, making him one of the most recognizable people on the planet. But it had also brought him endless pain, medical complications, social isolation, and a lifetime of being treated as a curiosity rather than a person. He preferred to be known as a giant, a term that carried connotations of strength, power, and even heroism. Freak suggested something to be gawked at in a sideshow, something fundamentally other and less than human. Andre's retaliation was brutal and unforgiving. In multiple matches, including the famous 1985 Body Slam Challenge at WrestleMania the Frere, Andre brutally overpowered Studd, using his legitimate strength to punish the man who had insulted him so deeply. The Undertaker later recounted that Andre damn near killed Studd in one encounter, delivering a message that personal attacks on his condition would not be tolerated. Where Studd's verbal attacks on Andre's appearance triggered violent retribution, the next wrestler would find that even professional presentation, choices, and suspected pharmaceutical enhancements could create lasting tension with the Giant, who valued natural ability above all else. Randy Savage. Where Big John Studd's conflict arose from deliberate insults that crossed personal boundaries, the professional relationship between Andre and Macho Man Randy Savage presented a case study in how Andre's physical limitations and personal moral code could create tension even with one of the most talented performers in wrestling history. During their late 1980s WWF feud, Andre found himself frustrated by Savage's heavy use of baby oil. For Andre, whose grip strength was already compromised by acromegaly's effects on his joints and hands, Savage's liberally applied oil made grappling incredibly difficult, turning simple holds into slippery, frustrating struggles that exposed Andre's declining capabilities. But there was another layer to Andre's frustration. According to Andre's daughter, Robin Christensen-Rusimov, Andre had a strong disdain for steroid users in wrestling. He believed in natural ability and legitimate size, taking pride in the fact that his own imposing physique was the result of his medical condition rather than pharmaceutical physiological enhancement. He suspected that Savage's impressive physique was enhanced through performance-enhancing drugs, adding a personal dimension of resentment to their working relationship. Despite these underlying tensions, their 1988-1989 storyline centered around the WWF Championship was a commercial hit. Savage's professionalism and ring intelligence helped ensure their matches went smoothly, though Andre's frustration occasionally surfaced in stiff moments that hinted at the personal tensions beneath the worked rivalry. While Savage's perceived unprofessionalism was limited to his presentation and suspected drug use, the next group of wrestlers would face Andre's wrath for far more blatant violations of professional standards that threatened the integrity of the entire show. The fabulous Freebirds. Unlike the in-ring conflicts that defined most of Andre's difficult relationships, the incident with the fabulous Freebirds, Michael Hayes, Terry Gordy, and Buddy Roberts, represented Andre wielding his backstage power as an enforcer of professional standards. In 1984, at a WWF show in Ohio, the Freebirds arrived late and clearly intoxicated, delivering a subpar performance that embarrassed both themselves and the WWF. Andre fired the trio on the spot, a decision that shocked the locker room given their popularity, their own deeply rooted psychological fear that limited creative storytelling possibilities. Jake the Snake Roberts. Relationship between Andre and Jake the Snake Roberts illuminated how Andre's personal fears could complicate creative storylines. Roberts' gimmick was built around his python Damien, but for Andre, who suffered from ophidiophobia, a real, legitimate fear of snakes, working with Roberts presented unique challenges. During their feud, Andre insisted that the snake be kept at a considerable distance from him at all times, significantly limiting creative possibilities. Beyond the snake issue, the in-ring work was complicated by their drastically different styles and Andre's limited mobility. Roberts was known for technical prowess, but Andre's deteriorating condition meant he couldn't engage in nuanced wrestling, leading to stiff exchanges. Roberts later said that Andre was difficult to work with due to his pain-driven irritability, painting a picture of a man trapped in a body that couldn't do what his position demanded. While Andre's fear of snakes made him vulnerable and cautious around Roberts, the next wrestler was one of the very few men who made Andre feel genuine physical fear based on proven real-world toughness that transcended the scripted nature of professional wrestling. Haku. In stark contrast to most of Andre's conflicts where he dominated through size, the relationship between Andre and Haku stands out as one of the few times Andre encountered someone he genuinely feared. Haku's reputation is legendary. He is widely considered one of the toughest, most legitimately dangerous men to ever enter the industry. One infamous tale involves Haku biting off a man's nose in a bar fight, cementing his reputation as someone you absolutely did not want to anger. In the 1980s, an alcohol-fueled incident saw Andre's abrasive behavior offend Haku, creating a confrontation that could have escalated dangerously. Wrestlers there, including Ric Flair and Bobby Heenan, noted that Haku was one of the very few men Andre genuinely feared. What makes this remarkable is that Andre's career was built on his size and intimidating opponents. But Haku's fearlessness and proven willingness to engage in real violence created a dynamic where Andre reportedly backed down, a rare occurrence that shocked witnesses. Where Haku inspired genuine fear in Andre through his legitimate toughness and willingness to fight regardless of size differences, our final wrestler simply inspired frustration and sadness, as Andre's declining body made even basic wrestling chemistry impossible, representing the tragic end of a legendary career. Bam Bam Bigelow. Our final entry concerns Bam Bam Bigelow, whose difficulties represented not personal animosity, but the inevitable frustrations when Andre's declining health made quality matches nearly impossible. Bigelow, known for remarkable agility despite weighing over 300 pounds, could deliver moonsaults and drop kicks that defied physics. His athletic style made him valuable to virtually anyone, except Andre in his final years. When Bigelow faced Andre, the physical reality of Andre's advanced acromegaly created matches that were clunky and frustrating. Andre's mobility had deteriorated to where he could barely move around the ring. Andre, struggling with chronic pain and often self-medicating with alcohol, occasionally worked stiff, delivering hard blows that seemed designed to compensate for his lack of mobility. In shoot interviews, Bigelow said working with Andre was like wrestling a brick wall. Bigelow's frustrations never escalated into a major confrontation. Both remained professional, but the lack of chemistry meant their storyline potential was severely limited. Their encounters served as a sad reminder of how completely Andre's condition had robbed him of the mobility that had once made him the most dominant force in professional wrestling. Thanks for watching. Check out other cards on the screen.